Even if you say it a little differently, it's fine.
Okay, I'll do my best.
I'm easy.
Well, hello, Dr. Neustadt. Thank you so much for coming on the Empower Nutrition podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Wonderful to be here.
So happy to have you. And it's so crazy that we just met and we found out we went to the same tiny schools at some point, not at the same time, but in a small town in Northern California. What are the odds?
I know. Elementary and high school. That is crazy.
So crazy. I literally wouldn't tell you where I was from because I'm like, there's no way you've heard of it.
Yeah, we kept drilling down more and more. And so I'm in San Diego now, and you're in North Carolina. And
Yeah.
so, when you said California and around Sacramento, I'm like, okay,
Crazy.
let's keep drilling down here.
Yeah.
But I have great memories of that area and swimming in the lake and
Yep.
being a kid out there and running free because it was pretty rural.
Yeah, I think people that yeah, exactly, because my parents still live there when I visit. I think people don't realize, oh, this used to be a very rural area with,
Yeah.
like, broken down trucks and less Porsches.
Oh my gosh, I haven't been there in decades, so I'd be shocked. But we used to ride our horses for miles and
Yeah.
motorcycles and go swim at the
Mhm.
lake and be out till nighttime, and nobody
Mhm.
really works. Nobody had cell phones, and it was awesome.
I love it. Well, tell me what happened next. Obviously, you're a huge expert in a lot of topics, especially bone health. So maybe tell me a little bit about that journey of how did you get focused on bone health and what was that like for you?
Well, the closest interest I ever had as a kid in bone health was breaking an arm.
Yeah.
So that's as close as I got. As an adult, when I went to medical school and I got into clinical practice, I started seeing patients, and some people were coming in, some women with osteoporosis. I thought I was doing a great job. I was doing what I was taught, which is typically how clinicians work. We get it into practice and we start doing the protocols and the approaches that we learned from school and from our mentors, and their bone density was going up. So
Mm.
I was happy. My mother-in-law had osteoporosis. She just passed away at 93, but this was almost 20
Oh,
years ago now.
yeah.
And she was working with her medical doctor. She was taking Fosamax. I was helping her with some integrative, holistic approaches with exercise recommendations and diet and dietary supplements. And her bone density was going up. So she was happy. I was happy. And her physician was happy. And then she fell and broke her hip. We thought it was, kind of an odd thing to happen because by that objective
Yeah.
measure, the almost universally the only thing that's tracked as a bone density test result, it was going up. But what I discovered when I looked deeper into the research is, despite the assurances from her physician and tens of millions of people believing the same thing, she and other people are woefully unprotected. What I found
Mm.
out was that number on the test, that bone density test result, only predicts 44% of women with osteoporosis who will break a bone, and only 21% of men. And in fact, every medical association organization that's looked at the research has correctly concluded that fracture risk depends on factors largely other than bone density, and it's fractures
Mm.
that are the most dangerous things with osteoporosis. It's not the number on the test, it's whether you break a bone. Because if you're a woman with osteoporosis and you fracture a hip, there's up to a 36% chance that you're going to be dead within a year. And about half of those people
Yeah.
never regain their full pre-fracture, pain-free life and enjoyment and full mobility that they had before. And some other shocking statistics that I discovered as I was going through the research was that if you're a 45-year-old woman, your risk of an osteoporosis fracture is equal to your combined risk of breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer. And in
Wow.
fact, osteoporosis causes more days spent in a hospital than other diseases like heart attacks, diabetes, and breast cancer. So I started,
Wow.
it was motivated by that episode in my life and in my family. And as I got more and more in the research, I recognized that there's a real unmet need in the general public and clinically for this information. So I just kept researching and developing products as well, because what I found and discovered was there are clinical trials on nutrients out there that have been shown to improve bone density, but more importantly, shown to reduce fractures, to maintain strong bones, as indicated by fewer fractures in clinical trials.
Mhm.
It didn't exist in the US. It didn't exist here. So
Mm.
I had to create those solutions for my patients.
That's interesting. So, do you feel like there's a better way to assess the risk, or is it just we can't really know?
There is a better way to assess the risk than just looking at one test result.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there's not a single test that is the perfect test. It's going to give you the best thing, the best
Mhm.
result, best
Mhm.
predictive value, as we say. A test is only in osteoporosis, at least, it's only as useful as it can predict fractures.
Got
And
it.
so there are things that are more accurate at predicting fractures than a bone density test result. And they're divided into categories of non-modifiable risk factors and modifiable risk factors. So, non-modifiable risk factors you can't change are your age. The older somebody gets,
Yeah.
the greater the risk for osteoporosis and fractures. We obviously can't change that.
Mhm.
Modifiable risk factors, though, you can change. One of the most predictable, one of the best predictors of a future fracture in somebody with osteoporosis is gait or mobility. How solid is somebody on their feet? Can they walk, 10, 18 feet, quickly? Or is it labored steps? Are they unsteady? Is their gait wobbly?
Mm.
That's
Mhm.
of fracture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Medications is a huge risk factor that's not being assessed enough for osteoporosis and fractures. And some of the most common medications that are being prescribed are not even on the radar for the prescribing clinician, that they increase osteoporosis and fracture risk.
Hmm.
Acid blocking medications are one.
Acid blocking. Yeah.
They're not approved by the FDA for long-term use, and the first
Yeah.
warning letter by the FDA and the risk for osteoporosis and fractures came out in, I think it was 2011. So this is not new information. And people who take it long term, it can increase their hip fracture risk, which is the most dangerous type of fracture, by
Yeah.
about 60%.
Dang.
And the other category of medication that also is not being screened for in patients to look at their osteoporosis and fracture risk are the antidepressants, the selective
Um,
serotonin and reuptake inhibitors like Wellbutrin, Prozac. Anything that increases serotonin destroys bone. There are serotonin receptors on bone. Most people just think of calcium when it comes to bone and the structure.
yeah.
It's a complicated organ in the body.
Mhm.
Receptors for serotonin and oxytocin and estrogen receptors and melatonin, and interacts with other aspects of our physiology and hormone systems in the body. It's a complicated, complex system, way more complicated than just saying take calcium and vitamin D and you're protected.
Yeah.
So looking at it from that perspective is how I kind of evaluate risk and understand how people can improve their bone health and reduce their risks.
Yeah. Do you think that when someone's been identified, say they have osteopenia, what do you think? Maybe just lay it out for me. Like, what do you recommend that that person does? It's often they're just kind of told to try to get more calcium, and maybe
Right.
if they're lucky, they'll also get their vitamin D level checked. But what would you recommend?
So both of those are important. It's not always important to get more calcium. I mean, one of the challenges is that there is this universal recommendation that doctors make that everybody should get calcium and everybody should get the same amount as a supplement.
And the goals are high,
They're dosing too high.
very high.
The USRDA for calcium is 1,200 milligrams per day in women and 1,000 milligrams per day in men. The average American woman gets 800 milligrams of calcium in her diet per day.
Yeah, and I would argue with these little bitties, by the time they have osteoporosis, they're not even the average. I find like they're often getting less.
Well, and they may, but I think
Yeah.
assessing somebody's diet or having them assess what they're doing, which
Mhm.
is one of my approaches that I take in terms of calcium supplementation, is I want people, if they're willing, to just take to track what they're eating for a couple of days
Yeah.
without making any changes,
Yep.
because people's dietary, what they eat tends to be habitual. It's a habit. They don't vary that often.
Hmm.
It gives a general indication. So if you just eat normal diet for a couple of days and calculate how many milligrams of calcium they're getting, that'll give a fairly good idea, in my opinion, of what they're doing with their diet and
Yeah.
calcium. And then we can make a customized recommendation.
Hmm.
So if they need more, definitely. But in my experience, getting about 800 milligrams per day as a dietary supplement is adequate for most people. And I'm sorry, 4 milligrams per day as a dietary supplement is adequate for most.
400 maybe.
Right, because if you're
Yeah.
getting about 800 in their diet, a woman is an extra 400 as a dietary supplement will give her 1,200 milligrams per day, which is
I've basically found the same math. I've come up with the same math problem answer typically, that it ends up being that most women on average need about 400 milligrams from a supplement to round out the goal. Yeah.
absolutely. And there's no evidence or data out there showing that getting more than 1,200 is better for bones. It has greater benefits, but there is a toxicity with calcium that can be
Yes.
associated. So we
Yeah.
don't want people to get more than 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams of calcium per day from all sources, diet plus dietary supplement.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that's calcium. And then vitamin D. I like to check vitamin D levels. The current research shows that for maximum fracture reduction, we're looking at wanting a vitamin D level around 30 to 44 nanograms per milliliter. That's how it's measured.
Okay. 44 is really specific, but
That's what the research
that's
shows, 30 to
that's what the
44.
math shows. Yep.
That's what the math shows for hip fracture reduction. But interestingly enough, even lower than that, you start to see benefits and improvements in bone density. It goes back to that story that a bone density test is not a great predictor of fracture. So you can see that bone density going up even with vitamin D levels lower than that.
You mean say
But
they start at like 10 and they get up to 20,
correct.
they're
But
gonna see an improvement. Yeah.
in bone density, but you're not getting the fracture reduction down at 10 and 12
Yeah.
and that sort of thing until it gets higher.
Still low.
And that's the calcium and vitamin D story. For me, in evaluating anything, I want to know, has it been shown in clinical trials to reduce fractures, not just improve bone density?
Hmm.
So in terms of supplementation, your question was about somebody with osteopenia. What would I recommend? Well, I look at the research on nutrients and dietary supplements through that lens. That's how I
Hmm.
evaluate them. And the only other nutrient that I routinely recommend, in addition to calcium and vitamin D, is MK4, 45 milligrams per day. That's a specific form of vitamin K2.
Yeah.
And that has been shown to improve bone density in postmenopausal women with osteoporosis, to stop the loss of bone in people on medications like prednisone, which is a powerful anti-inflammatory that strips the bones of calcium.
Yeah.
And it's also been shown to stop bone loss with other medications as well.
Mm.
More importantly, though, it's been shown to reduce fractures, to maintain strong bones,
Mm.
indicated by over 70% fewer fractures in clinical trials. And it's been approved in Japan since 1995 for bone health. So it's been incredibly
Yeah.
well studied. And that's the nutrient I mentioned earlier that I couldn't find in the clinical trial doses. So that's why and how I started my entire supplement company, was to create that for my patients, for the people I was
Yeah.
working with needed that. So there are different variations of that formulation now,
Mm.
all with the Strong Bones guarantee based on the research and clinical experience, that we guarantee that that people within 6 months, their bone density will stabilize or improve. But more importantly, if they don't, we guarantee it maintains strong bones, any of these variations of the formulas. And so if somebody breaks a bone, we will refund their money for all qualifying purchases between their bone
Aw.
results.
Wow.
And then if somebody wants to get more aggressive with supplementation, collagen has been shown, hydrolyzed collagen, to improve bone
Mm.
density, no fracture outcomes on it. There's one study in women with osteopenia showing that melatonin, 3 milligrams per day, improves bone density. So that research is out there as well. But diet is the foundation. really dietary supplements should be used as a supplement to a healthy diet, to supplement
Yeah.
our diets. And the research is clear, following a plant-forward, whole foods diet with adequate amounts of protein. The Mediterranean dietary pattern, for example, fits that bill. It's been shown repeatedly to reduce the risk of all sorts of diseases. And when it comes to bone health and osteoporosis, the more somebody adheres to that dietary pattern, the Mediterranean diet, the better the health outcomes, up to 20% reduction in osteoporosis risk, but more importantly, at 21%, it's associated with a 21% reduction in hip fractures in women with
Huh.
osteoporosis. So that's really important, whether they have osteopenia or not. You asked me about osteopenia, but a lot of these recommendations are the same regardless of
Yeah.
osteopenia or osteoporosis. We want to improve bone density and we want to maintain bone strength. And I'm sharing with you what the clinical trials and research show do both of those things. Exercise
Yeah.
is obviously crucially important.
Yeah.
But in order to get the benefits of exercise, the full benefits in terms of improving balance and strength, you've got to have adequate muscle. And in order to maintain muscle, you've got to have enough protein. And one of the challenges is as we get older, the amount of protein people need to maintain muscle mass and bone increases. And the US RDA for protein is too low as we get older to do that.
Yeah.
Research shows we need more than the US RDA. There are studies. There's a European Medical Association that came out. It was actually a few of them came out with a mission statement on bone health and osteoporosis, that concluding that just the amount of protein that somebody eats can account for 2 to 4% of bone mineral density. Because there
Interesting.
are 180 to 200 proteins in bone. It's more than just calcium. It's highly protein dependent, and it
Yeah.
needs that raw material to function and be healthy. So I recommend a minimum amount of protein. If somebody were to take their body weight in pounds and multiply it by 0.6, that's the number of grams of protein they should be getting a day.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to do with diet, and that's then with the supplement where maybe a protein powder can come in
Mhm.
and bridge that gap if they need more, along with
Yeah.
resistance and balance exercises.
So that's about, was that about like 1.2 grams per kilogram, maybe
A little
around
more,
that?
yeah, 1.3.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's right in the zone. And
yeah.
it's like you said, often not met. And then you have to, I love the way you just said plant forward, because I like everything almost, there's a bell curve of some kind, and with plant forward diet, and then if you go a little bit too far there and you say fully vegetarian, fully vegan, I find that those, when you go that far, it's very, very, very difficult to meet those protein needs. And so it's not that you don't have any animal proteins in your diet. It's that you eat, the majority of your food is plants, whole foods, like you said, and then you round it out um, with high protein foods. And because the other thing with going too far along that spectrum of plants is that you're also going to then get into that territory of like, okay, we're going to go dairy free now because that's an animal based food. And that's another thing where I just find that getting your calcium needs, even getting the 2/3 that we talked about, if you don't have, in my experience, if you don't have dairy in your diet, you're not going to hit it.
Oh, this is a great discussion. I love that you brought all of that up. So,
Yeah.
the research on vegan and vegetarian diets and osteoporosis is contradictory. The vast majority of the studies show that people who are vegan, follow vegan or vegetarian diets compared to omnivores, are at higher risk for osteoporosis. But not all the studies were negative.
Sure.
You're right. You're absolutely correct. That's reflected in the research, what you said, meaning it's speculated that the reason why most of those studies showed an increased risk, but not all of them, is because the people who were not at higher risk for osteoporosis were getting enough protein. And
Mm.
it's that protein component that becomes higher to get enough
Mm.
protein in vegan and vegetarian diets. The dairy issue is an interesting one, and I think you and I may. I'm a
Yeah.
big
Tell me what you think. I'm not,
yeah.
yeah, no offense. Tell
I'm
me.
a big fan of limiting dairy.
Mhm.
There's a lot of great non-dairy sources of calcium actually that are much better than dairy for delivering calcium. There's a blog on my website, top I think 10 non-dairy sources of calcium, that lists out all those foods. But the interesting thing with the dairy is that it's not just calcium.
Mhm.
It also has hormones in it, and it has other chemicals that are passed along from the cows into the dairy.
Mhm.
And the research on dairy consumption shows that it can increase the risk for breast cancer and prostate cancer and death from both of those cancers. So it's not that people should avoid all dairy. I don't avoid all dairy, but I do caution people not to get too much. The 2 or 3 servings